I gave people all the stuff they really needed. Social security checks, utility bills, TV guide.
I want a TV guidance counselor. TV guidance counselor. Staying up to watch all night, and everything's gonna be alright with my TV guidance counselor.
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I am Ken Reed, your TV Guidance Counselor, and this is the show where each and every week since February 2014, I've welcomed a fascinating person to the show to discuss classic television using a back issue of TV Guide magazine from my personal collection as the inspiration for our conversation. This week we've done this guide before, but it's my favorite ever issue of TV Guide, and it's been a while. This is the 1990 Halloween issue, and my guest is, there's no one better qualified to discuss this. He is writer Kendall R. Phillips, a fellow Ken, but he's a Kendall, not a Ken doll. He writes a ton of great sort of pop culture books, very smart guy, horror, sci-fi, superheroes. We talk about all his books here in the episode, but he came to my attention because I first got his book about silent cinema. We talk about that here quite a bit. It's called The Place of Darkness, but he's got a book about Kolchak the Night Stalker, a book called Rejected Fear, controversial cinema, and he's got at least 2 new books coming out, which we talk about here. You can go to KendallRPhillips.com and you can find all his info there and where you can buy his stuff. And what a good dude. Just had a great time talking to him. And as I said, super smart guy, fun guy, and has excellent taste. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Kendall R. Phillips.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Live via satellite, Kendall, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Ken. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to spend this week in television with you.
A fellow Ken, although not a Kenneth.
Kendall, but you can call me anything, just not late for dinner. That's all.
Fair enough. So I wanted to have you on the show because I love your last book, which was kind of oddly would not on the surface seem to be similar, I guess, to this, because you're in that book writing about sort of 1895 to 1931. But to me, the sort of cultural insight stuff of a sort of transitional period actually kind of relates pretty well to the exact issue you picked here, which happens to be my favorite issue of TV Guide, which I do have a favorite issue of TV Guide. It is October 27th to November 4th, 1990. So it's the 1990 Halloween issue.
Now, how could I not pick this with that great cover? Got our horror icons there. But I think, to your point, I think you're exactly right. You see in the history of horror these moments of transition. And so that the little book I wrote called Place of Darkness looked at the kind of prehistory of horror. As most of your learned listeners, viewers will know, horror as a term, like horror genre, really starts after Dracula and Frankenstein. People start saying, oh yeah, those are horror films. But there were these films before. And so it's kind of like, what were they? And then when you get to, the other big transitional period is that period of the 50s and 60s where horror is kind of making its way onto television. And then we get, again, this period in the 90s when, in fairness, cinematic horror is not hitting a lot of high points. Let's be honest, It's not the greatest moment in the history of horror. But horror is finding its place in television, in TV movies, in all these great series, and on this relatively new, for me at least, relatively new HBO, where you're suddenly finding some really great series. So it's a kind of fun to look at those moments of cultural transition and figure out how did people get their scary stories.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned in the book about how all the Nickelodeons, there was so much thirst for content. It was like driving the production of more stuff, but also importing things from like anything they could get. And there's sort of a parallel here where it's 1990, so video stores are still huge, but we got basic cable, we got UHF, we got networks, we got pay cable. So they're all sort of competing to we need content. Horror tends to be the thing they can sell that tends to translate well, that we can pull from other countries easily. So it kind of makes sense in that regard. And the other sort of waves is, and you're far more insightful than I'm at best pseudo-academic here, but the sort of shift to horror becoming for children. is sort of always the end, not the end game, but the end result. So in the 50s, it was like you had these 1930s horror films that were now children's fare with the Monster Kids. And 1990, I would argue, is sort of the same thing, although not as well documented, because you have these kids that were watching pretty hardcore 70s and early 80s horror on VHS because, we're 10 years into VHS. That's now become sort of children's entertainment, which is why you have like Freddy and Jason, these hard R movies that are now cartoons or for children. It's very strange.
Yeah, and it's funny when you parallel that. So if you go back to that period, if you go back all the way to the early period of film where you get Dracula and Frankenstein, I think one of the things that really motivated early censorship, and so our learned film listeners will know, heard of the production code, which was sort of Hollywood's internal censorship board. That was partly driven by concerns of kids seeing these scary movies, right? They were worried about sex, of course, and crime, but horror was another big thing. Oh no, we don't want the kids being traumatized by scary movies. And then you see the same sort of thing happening in radio in the mid 30s, because a lot of these horror anthology series popped up because they had been on films. And so suddenly radio's like, well, we're going to cash in and have our spooky stories and do all that. That is what leads to television, which the first efforts at television horror are really these same sort of anthology series like Witch's Tale and others that would eventually lead to some things like The Hitcher and Tales from the Crypt. Like those would all kind of build there. And so then you get to the 80s, which is kind of like my time. Like I was a teenager in the 80s, and it was that VHS, like the very serious concern. Here it was pretty big. In Britain, it was even more dramatic. They had a whole scandal of what they called the video nasties, these horrible VHS that kids could just go home and watch. How could someone allow that to happen? So I love that dissemination, but I also think, to your point, I think what happened, especially with the VHS period, and it's kind of what's happening now, is horror always has an audience. Like people will, like sci-fi may come and go, Westerns kind of come and go, gangster films come and go, but horror kind of just always is drawing its audience. And what we saw in the VHS era, and in some ways the TV movie eras, which we're seeing a little of this, the end of the TV movie era here in this week we're spending time with, but you see this, what I call the high concept, low budget films.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you're a kid like I am, you remember all those full moon productions, so like Doll Man and Puppet Master and like these really bizarre, crazy stories with horrible budgets, like the worst like special effects in the world. But the concept was enough. And of course, always for us, it was the cover art, right? Which was never from the movie. It was like some illustrated like, ooh, I want to see that. And of course, you never do see that.
I wouldn't have rented Subspecies without that painting.
Exactly. You say, I want to see that scene. And it's like, no one's going to see that scene. But I feel like the same was true for this period in TV horror, where there's a similar sort of desire, obviously in some of the anthology returns like the Hitchhiker and the reboot of Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Tales from the Crypt, but also the kind of, like I said, the last cycles of those great made-for-TV horror, which really had their heyday in the 70s when you had films like Gargoyle and The Curse of the Black Widow, which is actually shown this week. But no, again, to your point, what I find interesting about media history, especially in terms of culture, is the way these things keep cycling back around.
Yeah, and they always kind of, I think, appeal to young people as well, because, kids like thrill rides, but also, the younger you are, the scarier the world is. And I think there's a certain aspect of sort of exercising those demons. And then I also have a theory that someone smarter than I am, who is academic, could probably write quite a bit on, but that millennials are specifically fascinated with rules. And that's why we saw this rise of vampires and wizards and witches stuff in the late 2010s, because they're so rule-based. And it's, the horror before that, the sort of torture porn stuff or the slasher stuff, it's anarchy, which is the scariest thing, that there's no reason for it. Like that, that's why I think the first Halloween, it works so well, because it's literally There's no reason for this at all. That's why it's terrifying. He's Carpenter calls Michael Myers a shark. Like, it just, you can't reason with it. It's dead behind the eyes. And then they spent the rest of the remakes and sequels trying to justify why it happened, making it less scary.
This is why there should never be sequels. I'm going to hold on to that. 99% of the time I'm right about that. But it's funny, and I know we'll get to talking about the movie. What I would have done on Wednesday night, which is watch the original Halloween. But the TV version of Halloween, the TV edited version, where they added some footage because they had to obviously cut things out because of television censors, has caused endless trouble, because that's where you first see this illusion that Laurie is Michael's sister. So when I teach that film, I'll often say to students, to your point, why does Michael latch on to Laurie? Like, what is it about Laurie? And some of them, again, the kids who think they're clever will say, because she's his sister. And I will say, not in this film. And that's only because the TV version or because of all this build. What I love about the first Halloween is you're right. He is a dark force. What brings him on Laurie is she walks up to the Myers house, even though the kid says, Billy says, never go to the Myers house. And she says, my dad's the real estate agent. I can do what I want. And of course, then it's like, nope, you really should have not stepped on that front porch.
Yeah, you poke the bear. It's that very fairy tale cautionary tale piece. You look into the abyss and it looks back at you kind of thing, which... Yeah, it got
yes,
winked
and
at.
winks. And you think, oh, no.
Which, and we'll dive into the guy in a moment here, but like in your book, when you're talking about these early days too, there's obviously the sense of the uncanny, because it's like you're basically seeing ghosts on film and people are like, what the hell is this? Never seen this before. And the early films are basically extensions of people's spiritualist magic acts. Like, that kind of makes sense. And people, it sounds ridiculous, but there's this sort of like, well, I can see them moving. Can they see me moving? Like, it has a weird two-way, like kind of disquieting thing. And to a degree, television is a little bit more like that than movies, because it's sort of, which I think is the genius of that part of Poltergeist, in that you're sort of pulling in these ghosts from the airwaves, especially pre-cable, and they're in your house. Like, you're channeling invisible things that are showing you horrors in your house. And there's something unique to watching horror stuff on TV in that way that I don't think we get with like streaming or anything like that.
No, and I think particularly to your point about it comes, unbidden, like you just have the TV on and these things come in, and this may be too deep into history, so my apologies, but when those horror anthologies started showing up on radio, really in 1931, as soon as Dracula and Frankenstein made money, someone said, hey, I've got an idea, let's tell scary stories and people will listen to it. Around 35, 36, there's an effort in Congress to censor radios. They really want to create a proactive censorship board like the production code, like looking at every script before it goes out on radio, which would have been crazy. But anyway, one of the things they were concerned about was horror. And one of the arguments they made was that these horror stories, or they called them, there's a great phrase, someone used them, blood and thunder stories, right? Because they're all about murder and they're all about loud noises and bangs and screams. So it's like,
isn't it an AC/DC record, Blood and Thunder?
I believe it is. Actually, I think that's really one of these senators who's really pushing this, a guy from Iowa, makes the argument that it's like a home invasion. These radio shows come into your house, and if you're the father of the house, you got to take care of your kids, right? You can't police it. You need some way to close the. He literally says it's the same as like locking your door. You need to put a lock on the radio, and they want to do that through censorship. And so it's funny how those things keep coming around as those kind of anxieties about how these messages are getting, and more importantly, what they're doing to us and what they're doing to our children.
Directly to the children without parental involvement through sort of absenteeism or ignorance is sort of this terrifying thing. So the cover here, as we mentioned, it's got commissioned art, which is always great. It's this sort of what's the artist that did Fear and Loathing? That's sort of
I can just think of Hunter S. Thompson, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, the guy who did the drawings of it. But it's sort of a haunted house in that style, and then with like charmingly badly cut and pasted press photos of Jason, Freddy, the Crypt Keeper, and Benjamin Cross from the remake of Dark Shadows.
Yeah, it is like a bad Photoshop. It's like it's every sophomore design major's hungover last minute projects.
Yeah, it's very high school art class collage is what we have going on here. But the article in here by David Lieberman is really great, and it sort of paints this pretty comprehensive picture of sort of where we're at in 1990. To your point, the horror franchises are pretty much over. The big ones are over, but they're not. They refuse to admit it at this point. They're sort of mining comic books, which would. This was the beginning of it. The Swamp Things, Batman '89 had just come out, like Tales from the Crypt. We're sort of mining comic book culture, and the Stephen King stuff's coming in. So the first thing on the first page is Psycho 4: The Beginning, which is the made-for-TV pilot, sort of prequel pilot. The second prequel pilot of, or there's three, I think, because there was the Bates Motel show recently, right? It's very not good, but it stars Henry Thomas from E.T. as Norman Bates.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example to your point of where, horror, and we've seen this, through its cycle, horror cinema and horror television kind of having this weird symbiotic relationship. And it is often the case, like horror gets really popular in movies and then TV tries to sort of follow along. And then when horror fades down, it's like then TV is left to pick up the pieces. And here you see them literally picking up like, okay, I can grab Psycho, I can grab Friday the 13th, even if it's not Jason. I can grab, Swamp Thing, I can grab the Stephen King stuff. And it's able to tell these, more palatable versions of the stories, like not the extreme version that you'd see in the cinema. So this is really great. This is a great article. It's really well chosen.
A little bit more leeway because they're like, oh, it's basic cable or pay cable. We can go a little bit further. The Swamp Thing series looked like the Alan Moore, Steve Bissette Swamp Thing, but was basically had no scripts. It's god awful.
Yes, that was what I would call a low-budget, low-concept television show, which was so
very much.
Because I loved Swamp Thing. In fact, I just was rereading. I was out in L.A. and I had a long flight back to New York, and so I thought I'm going to get something, but I'm too old and my eyesight's too bad. I don't want to read on the plane. And I ran across this comprehensive Alan Moore complete set of his Swamp Thing, so I grabbed it. And I loved it. And I remember I loved the Wes Craven Swamp Thing from, I think it was 82. Mm-hmm. It wasn't good. It wasn't good by any stretch, but I loved it. And so when this was being talked about, I thought, fabulous. Like, this could be so good. And people should remember, and I know we'll probably get to this later, this was also around the time The Flash was on. And I actually thought The Flash was a really good, early, sort of more mature, I don't want to say adult television show, but a more mature version of a superhero as opposed to, Justice League and Super Friends and that sort of stuff.
It wasn't campy. Yeah.
It wasn't campy. Yeah, it was actually, interesting stories and good characters. And so I went to Swamp Thing thinking, okay, let's see it. And then I said, please stop. I don't want to see it.
Well, because they used the suit from Return of Swamp Thing, which looks so good. Like it's the comic come to life. And, you'd figure you could make such a good horror anthology series, even if you just, that Alan Moore run, that American Scream run, or American Gothic rather, there's your episodes. Like they're storyboarded for you. You know what I mean? It's all there. But instead it would be like Anton Arcane is trying to steal some land. Like it made no sense. No. It was so disappointing. And the other thing they did was Dracula the Series, which I don't know if you remember or if you watched.
I remember only that it existed, and I think I didn't bother to see it. Yeah, so
it is god awful. It sort of takes the later period Hammer horror sort of Fu Manchu version of Dracula, the evil businessman, take over the world Bond villain, and makes him that. Named Mr. Alucard, obviously, and some kids discover that he's actually Dracula, and he's trying to kill these kids.
Which, of course, is what happens. Do they have a dog named Scooby? And
no dog, because that would have been too expensive. And it's a Canadian. What's the country? It's like Canada, Czechoslovakian co-production. It's like this really low budget, and the theme song. It might be the most 1990 thing ever. Like it literally goes, Dracula. It's like this, it's so bad. It's kind of amazing. But had the name, they don't got to pay for Dracula. Friday the 13th, the series, I actually love. I think it's a great concept. some amazing episodes, but everyone was pissed that it was called Friday the 13th.
Totally. I was one of those people who turned it on thinking, I can't wait to see what Jason's. I've always had a soft spot for the hockey mask wearing nut job. And boy, that one was disappointing. But there had been, there was a series there of these fairly decent, interesting, again, I think of Freddy's Nightmares. I remember really enjoying Freddy's Nightmares. Like I said, Friday the 13th was really good. I go back to some of those HBO anthology series, which I think in many ways, those series set the stage. And including one that I think doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think it's mentioned in this article, Monsters.
Yeah.
Which again was a really high concept, not quite Twilight Zone level high concept, but pretty interesting stuff, pretty cheesy special effects. But like again, the high concept made up for the low budget, and it was really good. These are really the series that set the stage for that renaissance of TV horror that would come in the 90s with Twin Peaks, and then of course the X-Files, and then that would lead to Supernatural and Buffy and all this.
American Gothic and all the Millennium, and so Tales from the Darkside started in '85, which was Richard P. Rubenstein and George Romero, and they wanted to produce a TV show in Pittsburgh, which is kind of a crazy idea. And it was literally shot in warehouses in Pittsburgh. A lot of great New York actors are in Tales from the Darkside. I think it's the first adaptation of a Clive Barker story, is in Tales from the Darkside. Some of them are absolutely terrible, but some of them are great. And Monsters was sort of their spin-off series that was slightly more comedic, was more like how Outer Limits promised a monster every week versus Twilight Zone. It was kind of that approach. I will say Monsters, the series finale of Monsters, is a one-person, only one character, one actor. It's written, directed by, and stars Tom Noonan. Oh. And it's an adaptation of Stephen King's The Moving Finger.
Oh, nice.
And it is great, and it is weird and amazing. And because they knew that it was the last one, they're like, let him go nuts. And it's like a must watch. It's one of the best King adaptations around.
Oh, that's see, I think this is what gets lost, because you see people will look back and they see like the Stephen King It, the TV version. I mean, it had its moments. We can talk more about that. Or, Swamp Thing, which was clearly a bit of a miss, or The Psycho, the beginning, clearly a bit of a miss. But there were these gems scattered in there that, I think really were because again, if you go back, horror gets to television through anthology series. Mm-hmm. TV doesn't quite know what to do with it, so they try genre blending. So they try like Bewitched, or they try the Addams Family, or the Munsters, and it's like, and it really is Dark Shadows, which starts, the great Dan Curtis soap opera that goes forever, like 8,000 episodes, and, and gets weird. I mean, gets absolutely wackadoodle weird. And then it's really like Kolchak the Night Stalker. And if people haven't checked out Kolchak, I should say, spoiler alert, plug alert, I wrote a book called Kolchak the Night Stalker that's like a TV milestones book about the series. But if you folks who haven't seen Kolchak, that is really the hinge series that lays the idea, I think, for even a lot of these shows like Dracula the Series and the Swamp Thing, because it's like, okay, let's have an ongoing series where monsters are hunting bad people. And then that, of course, would lead to the shows that really created this current, I think probably the current ongoing horror boom in TV, which are, like you said, Buffy and Millennial and the X-Files and all those sorts of shows.
And a lot of these shows they mentioned here were sort of ahead of their time. They mentioned a show I completely forgot about called Blood Ties that was basically Dynasty about vampires. There was also one called Kindred the Embraced, I think, that was similar. It was about these old money vampires who were like who were basically running sort of Hellfire Club high society, which is a soap opera, and which now would be on the CW for decades. But people hated it then because they didn't realize that you could market. There was this whole market of like women who wanted this sort of romantic horror stuff, this Anne Rice kind of thing. The women who were watching Beauty and the Beast every week and made that show a hit. They for some reason had put together that like maybe this is an audience that we should program stuff for. But the key to Kolchak to me, and this is sort of the most fascinating thing in your book about the sound film era, is the transition to like truly American horror. And if I'm misreading this, tell me, but it's it's sort of when the detective element comes into the horror. That's sort of the uniquely American, like there's a skepticism and surely this isn't real. This old superstition, we're better than this kind of thing that sort of twists it from that old world, it's foreign European stuff. And the Night Stalker is like the prime example of that.
No, in fact, in the little book I wrote about, and for those who haven't, there's a great series by Wayne State University Press called TV Milestones, and they get people to write about one particular series and kind of make the argument, why does it matter? Now, in fairness, Kolchak is a little tough. It lasted one season. Like that was it. Not even a full season. It really didn't have great ratings. But, to your point, Ken, it was, I would argue, really the beginning of what I would call the gothic investigator. A little bit different than the occult expert. So you go back to your Van Helsing or your witch finders who know the occult, because Kolchak didn't know, and he was, as you said, utterly skeptical. He's a hard scrabble Chicago reporter. He doesn't take nonsense. He lives in a very real world. This is not the world of Harry Potter and nonsense like that, or Buffy where we know there's vampire. He is always skeptical, but that's what makes this really American version of horror, because we don't buy that nonsense, superstitious nonsense, right?
Old world, old country bunk. It's like a very, not here. Which, side note, did you ever read the Golden Age comic character? I think it's Dr. 13.
No.
Oh, it was in DC and they reintroduced him in the 80s, but I cannot believe no one's adapted this character. He's a detective, but he's a staunch skeptic, but all he investigates are supernatural things. And the craziest supernatural stuff is happening around him, but he's basically Mr. Magoo in that does not believe a thing, like no matter what's happening. And he'll be like, no, rational explanation. And it's very clever because he manages to come out on top and all these things because he completely has blinders on to that's like his superpower is not recognizing it. It's a very clever series. And they never really knew what to do with the character. They tried to reboot him a few times, but he kind of lives in that like Dr. Fate kind of pocket of the DC universe, and it's such a cool, weird character. I just love that
James
idea.
Gunn is listening. James,
yes,
we've given you reboot Swamp Thing from the Alan Moore, and we've given you Dr. 13. I think you could give us a little taste. I mean, I'm just putting it out there.
That'd be a great anthology series. It would be almost like what Clive Barker wanted to do with the Harry D'Amour stuff. If we had that as a series, it would have been really
absolutely
cool.
And it would be better than Monster Squadron or whatever that was.
Yes. So that's all this stuff booting in here. You could also, there's also maybe the scariest thing in this horror article. There is an ad for a 900 number where you can call Bob Denver, and do trivia and win $100.
Yes, win $100 if you answer 9 questions with Bob Denver. Yes.
He looks really creepy. It's, no disrespect to Bob Denver, but the photo they've used here, he's sitting in a rattan, like a Morticia Adams chair. He's on the phone, just staring into your soul, like he's making the creepiest, dirty phone call, and it's in black and white, and he's just like, yeah, I'm calling you.
Yes, and these deep-seated wrinkles that Gilligan should not have. It's like the Crypt Keeper wearing the Gilligan outfit. No, it's just a testament to how far your career can fall. I think we should all remember this.
Yes, and this is even a year after he did Back to the Beach. Then I have to mention there's an article in here about Ken Ober, who is no longer with us, but is a Boston stand-up comic, hosted Remote Control, which is one of the key quintessential Ken Reed formative television experiences, that show. And then there's a very interesting article in here by Ed Weiner, or it might be Weiner, about essentially sanctioned fan fiction.
Yeah, you've seen the TV show. Now read the book. I loved this. I wanted to go out and find some of these books, to be honest.
Yeah, it's the whole weird sort of post fan culture, 70s fan culture, pre-internet, where you had book series about Star Trek and all these different, V had a bunch of them, all these sort of, are they canon, are they not? It was this little blip where you had this world. And they do mention Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, which I think kind of is slightly out of this realm, and to a degree, because it kind of shaped the series so much, but it was just such a place in time.
No, and I love
article.
all the bio books or the Tell Me More by Larry King. Please, nobody wants to
Right.
all these sorts of books about TV.
And then we get to the listing. So let's dive in here. Saturday night. Also, they review Get a Life, and they like it because it's great. What are you doing?
So my Saturday, of course, I was a kid. I was explaining this to some young people. I'm old. These young people, they don't remember Saturday morning. So I can't follow the rules here, Ken, and begin in the evening, because I know for me, I was up early. I was a Super Friends Batman fan. I remember live action Land of the Lost and Kids from Caper. Like this, I'm old school 70s. Up early with my post toasties and my parents saying turn the TV down. Yeah. So I'm gonna start in the morning with, of course, a great sort of TV movie tie-in. At 9 a.m. I've got Ghostbusters, Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters. Not as good as the original Ghostbusters TV or TV cartoon series, but still a good continuation. And then what I love is at 9:30, I've got Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, the cartoon version. So that's going to keep me going all morning. I'll probably have a little lunch, a little nap, a little snooze because I'm getting older. Then at 1 o'clock, of course, I got to start my Halloween. I should say, Ken, and to your listeners, I realize I have cheated the game here because I picked Halloween week. Which means almost everything I'm watching is going to be a horror movie.
It's the best week
right now. So I'm going to start early with 1 o'clock, one of my favorite John Carpenter films. I think one that kind of gets lost among the bigger heavy hitters like Your Thing and Your Halloween and Your Escape from New York. And it really kind of fell in the midst of that run, which was, again, one digression, one of the greatest runs of an independent filmmaker, director ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like Halloween, Escape from New York, The Thing, which did not do well, but still, wow, was like a brilliant, brilliant film. And in the midst of that run, we have this little film that I still think is a gem, is The Fog, which is also Jamie Lee Curtis and Adrienne Barbeau, who, of course, was also in Swamp Thing. So we all remember Adrienne. Yep. So that's my 1 o'clock. Now I'm going to finally get to the rules of the game, which is my Saturday evening, Ken, is going to be the Horror Hall of Fame. I bet most people have forgotten this. Most people probably should have forgotten this, but it was an annual series hosted by Robert Englund, the Oscars of the horror. Forget the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We got the Horror Hall of Fame. This was the first one, and it was airing on, I can't see, what is that, ABC, I'm guessing?
I think it's syndicated, so it was in a syndication package. Yeah. They did, I think, 3 of them or maybe 4 of them, I think.
I think there were 3, and then there was some later spin-off that used the name but was not related to that. But yeah, so this is obviously what I'm going to watch, the first one where we're going to have really some of the greatest films in horror history inducted into the Hall of Fame. I'm sure they're very honored by this now. So you've got your Exorcist, your Psycho, and of course Night of the Living Dead. So these were films that absolutely made the modern era of horror. You've also got Boris Karloff, Vincent Price, some of the greatest actors. So yeah, I can guarantee, I'm not sure if I actually did watch this because this was my first year of graduate school. So probably
a little busy.
I was under a table somewhere. Honestly, Ken, I'll just be honest. I don't know. I was doing something untoward somewhere in the world.
Your own Horror Hall of Fame was happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Doing something horrible. I can guarantee that. But I would have been watching the Horror Hall of Fame.
It's fun. There's also, like, in and out of the commercial, Steve Johnson does little how to do special effects things with Linnea Quigley, who was married to at the time. And if people want to go back and listen to the Steve Johnson episode of the show, we talk about it there. Also, Adrienne Barbeau been in the show. Yeah, it's very fun. And people take for granted now how rare it was for us to have any sort of television program that was about horror movies. You'd get, like, Siskel and Ebert would cover it every now and then. There was a Stephen King special called This Is Horror that aired on MTV of all things. But for the most part, unless like Terror in the Isles was airing or something like that, you didn't get this sort of commentary about horror that much. So it was really sort of validating in a weird way. Also, I did notice on Saturday morning at 5:40 in the morning, the Vault of Horror is on.
If I wasn't so hungover, I would have got up to watch that. Sorry. I probably was coming home about that time, 5:48.
It's a good time to watch it.
Point, Ken, that it is weird. I try to explain this to my students now. We are in right now what I would call the third golden age of horror, with the first golden age in that 30s, the Universal monsters, second golden age, which a lot of the things here and we're watching this week, that period, I would say from 68 to 82, where you have like everything, The Exorcist, Night of the Living Dead, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Alien, you name it, The Shining, they're all kind of bundled there in this decade-long period. Then we go into kind of this quiet 80s and 90s period. And now, of course, we're back post Get Out. We just continually having successful horror and interesting horror. So in 1990, horror did not get a lot of love, right? There was not a lot of respectability. So the idea of someone putting on a Hall of Fame and not just goofing, it's not just, I mean, it was fun. And you had Robert Englund hosting and you had a lot of kind of shticky bits, but they were really trying to demonstrate the cultural importance of horror, which is something you see now with like Eli Roth series and Horror Noir, which is a great documentary about blacks in horror films.
Yes.
And just a lot more attention, serious attention to horror. So I love this series was a really kind of early example of that.
Yeah, it's really the first time you started getting people, like mainstream people, talking about the allegory and the sort of the fact that marginalized people, which this comes up in the horror noir documentary, can get a social message through in a horror film that they could not get through anywhere else, specifically because people go, they kind of miss the allegory somehow sometimes. And sort of the best example, although not a horror movie, is Ken Johnson's V, which is about a fascist takeover of America, which he literally pitched it as a straight fascist takeover of America. And they said no. And then he just threw out their aliens and they went greenlit. And he didn't change anything. Like, it's the same thing, but they're like, yep, okay, perfect. And it's really when you get, intentionally or not, horror genre stuff is always a reflection of what's going on socially at the time, even if people aren't trying to do that. It's like what's scaring people. And
Ken, I'm going to take an opportunity to do my second horribly blatant moment of self-promotion, because
yes, do it.
That's what I do. So I had a book 20 years ago called Projected Fears, Horror Films in American Culture, that made exactly this argument. Like these prominent horror films like Dracula, Psycho, Halloween, Night of the Living Dead capture something in the moment, and that's why they become important. So they're not just a horror movie. Like, you think about a film like The Exorcist, like everyone had to go see it. Like, same thing with like more in our generation, The Sixth Sense. Like, everybody was talking about it. Oh my God, have you seen this movie? So this film. So the shameless plug is here in just a few months, Projected Fears, the second edition, is going to come out, and it deals with all those first films, but also the more recent films. So it's 1931 to 2017.
Oh, awesome.
And it does cover the history of the American horror film through these like really iconic films, including my most recent editions, Blair Witch, Saw, and Get Out. And so if people are interested in the history of horror film, keep an eye out. Projected Fears, Horror Films in American Culture, the second edition, revised and expanded, will be coming to bookshelves near you anytime soon.
A must buy. I'm looking forward to reading it. And I also think of the documentary, The American Nightmare, which came out about 20 years ago. Because visually, a brilliant thing that thing does is it intercuts real news footage with the movies. And it even as a fan of this stuff, it's hard to tell what you're watching sometimes. It's like Absolutely. Very, very powerful to see those things side by side. And so 1990, although we have the Gulf War, which had just started, it didn't really, no one was really, it didn't feel like a war for some reason in America. We weren't having like horror stories. There was a lot of sort of Operation Desert Storm propaganda stuff. But for whatever reason, that war, we never got like veteran stories later like we did with Vietnam. I mean, 7 out of 10 anthology horror shows in the 80s were about Vietnam vets in some way. It was just like this, being haunted by the war. And it wasn't like that in 1990. And sort of 88 to 92 into 94, 96, there wasn't really like anxiety or horror in the air for some reason. It wasn't close enough to the change of the millennium that you had that sort of doomsday stuff. People were doing like relatively okay-ish still in America. So it was like, what what are we scared of?
Yeah, it's funny because the first Gulf War, of our many Gulf Wars, but that particular Gulf War was so sanitized. I remember watching it on TV, and it was just these, almost computer game screens showing like bombs going off, and you go, "Ooh, that's cool." It did not feel. Whereas, obviously we had like some other films like, Scream, and then in 96, then again we have the millennial films like Sixth Sense and Blair Witch, but it's post 9/11.
Yeah.
Where you get Saw, which I think I would argue and do in the book is sort of the first serious post 9/11 film. Not that it's about 9/11, but it really captures that feeling of being trapped, being hopeless, being terrified, like things are out of control. They're not supposed to be out of control. And I feel like that was, as you say, that was one of the things that just exploded into the horror subculture, subconsciousness of the whole country.
It's chaos with no rules. Like
Exactly.
that's the most terrifying thing. Like just pain for pain's sake. Like, and then even the Saw films, if you look at the trajectory of those movies, the first one, there kind of is no reason. It's like, there's a sort of, but it's, it's a little Dr. Phibes kind of reason, but for the most part, no. And then later you get this elaborate backstory of why they would do this and what the motivation, but it's like, no, you're taking the power away from the horror of this. Which I guess maybe is the point. I guess maybe that's why people.
Well, again, one of the things we see in the history of horror is when monsters become too familiar, they become comedic. So I still remember seeing the first Friday the 13th. Now, Freddy had a couple of, wise crack lines, but he was still pretty terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
But by the time you get to Halloween 3 or Nightmare on Elm Street 3, suddenly Freddy is becoming increasingly cartoonish, and as it goes on, it becomes more about how goofy the kills are. Same thing with Friday the 13th. And in fairness, same thing with like Dracula and Frankenstein. After they've had their little decade run, they end up in kids' TV shows. They end up and eventually like Count Chocula. So, I mean, like, that's a pretty big fall from the most terrifying thing in the world when you're Bela Lugosi to a breakfast cereal. Like, it's almost as bad as Bob Denver, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's less scary than Bob Denver at that point. So yeah, absolutely. It's such a weird transition. So 1990, it's like the predominant sort of popcorn genre that had replaced the horror film in the sort of late 80s into the 90s, 100% is the action movie. I go back and I watch those late 80s, early 90s action movies, and they are gory as any horror movie I can think of, like murder, like kill counts like crazy, but they're just presented in a completely different genre. And for whatever reason, that's how we ingested that sort of thing at that time, and that little blip sort of between the Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street pre-Scream. It was like, aside from Sleepwalkers and, maybe Dr. Giggles.
Well, clearly. Also belongs in the Horror Hall of Fame. But
right,
I think it's
shocker.
the Reagan effect. It's like, big, strong men are going to take care of us. So you get your Schwarzenegger and your, Jean-Claude Van Damme and your Sylvester Stallone and all these guys with their muscles and oiled bodies, and they're going to take care of it. And so, all that violence, all that anger, all that fear, but just packaged into the action film. But of course, that wouldn't last, because at some point we realize those guys can't save us. What's out there is still out there. Still waiting.
Right. And it's funny. Did you see the Equalizer movies, the Denzel Washington Equalizer movies? Yeah. Which, side note, the guy who wrote and directed the movie Vamp wrote the scripts for. He did Vamp and then was like a 20-year kind of nothing, and then the Equalizer movies. But especially the first one, the whole last 30 minutes of that movie is a Friday the 13th movie. When they're in the Home Depot and he's just killing people with power tools, like, it is no different from Friday the 13th.
Put a hockey mask on and change the soundtrack, and you got I totally agree. Totally agree.
It's just slightly different. So it's a very interesting that brother kinship of the sort of very violent action movie and the slasher movie. It's something I haven't really seen explored that much, but it seems like they're very, very similar.
Yeah, and comedy. And you look at a lot of comedies, and it's pretty much we laughed at it in the comedy, we screamed at it in the horror, but it's kind of the same plot.
Yeah, and that's why I always recommend Dance Macabre to everybody who wants to do comedy, because I'm like, it's the structure that you'll learn. For whatever reason, it's easier to understand the structure when he presents it as horror, and it's just a different punchline. Like, that's the only thing. It's a good formula. So Sunday, what are you doing?
Well, so the perfect transition. Well done. You can tell you're a trained professional. I am settling in for action. I got to say, Sunday, not a lot of here that's making me fall in love. I am not watching Lethal Weapon, even pre all the anti-Semitism, etc., from someone on that movie. I'm going to go on down the dial to my premium channels, and I cannot not show up for my buddy Patrick at the Roadhouse. So that's my evening. I'm going to crack a beer and sit back and enjoy. I'm going to head on down to the Roadhouse.
Pain don't hurt. And again, he's the most violent person in that movie. Like he messes some dudes up like horror movie style. It's almost that's another point you make in the silent film book is this other thing that kind of makes things American is we're getting the POV of the monsters we're starting to get, which was not something you would get in sort of horror stories prior to that. And the sort of action film evolution is almost the next step of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah, we're just continuing to involve. Well, again, we're Americans, so violence is our thing, right? You know, we can't show sex on TV, but boy, you can kill people left, right, and center.
No problem at all. And I've mentioned it on the show before, but when I lived in England and I would see movies on TV there and see the violence cut out, but not the sex scenes, it like really confused me.
Yeah.
Like I intellectually knew that was a thing there, but I was like, of course, yeah. Why do we do it this way back in? It's so strange. It's like someone got the wrong lesson from I Am Legend.
Exactly. Oh, we should be the zombies. Great, thank you.
Right. It's not a twist that he's the monster the whole time. It's the coolest part.
Yes.
Monday, what are you doing?
So Monday, I am settling in back to my horror world, and I cannot help but love my buddy Tobe Hooper, who is one of the great, I think in some ways, maybe changing, but for a long time was one of the unsung heroes of the American genre. Understandably, because there are a lot of misses in the Hooper filmography, but anybody who can pull off a trifecta like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I still say pound for pound the best American horror film ever made. I won't fight you because I'm a coward, but I'll say I'll fight you.
It's a good argument for that. Yeah.
I'll correct it. Poltergeist, which again, a lot of people give a lot of credit to Steven Spielberg, and it's a very Spielberg film, but if you really watch Poltergeist, it is a Spielberg film rich, like kind of grinded through the meat grinder of Tobe Hooper's aesthetic, and then arguably one of his greatest productions is the made-for-TV Salem's Lot.
It's my favorite Tobe Hooper. My top three Tobe Hooper are Salem's Lot, Funhouse, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which people aren't happy about, but I love that it's his. Basically, give me a budget and I'll make a commentary about how stupid it is that you gave me a budget.
Yes.
That's what that movie is to me. And I love Invaders from Mars. I love Invaders from Mars, which to me, that's maybe like his most overlooked movie because it like the stuff that's the closest to Poltergeist, I feel like, is Funhouse and Invaders from Mars. Like that sort of, child in suburbia nightmare.
Yeah, I think Invaders from Mars is one of those. It's a little bit like John Carpenter's The Thing, although that got later celebrated in that it was probably his most accomplished, mature film. Like you really see he is doing his thing. He's got it. He knows what he's doing. There's no hesitation. But timing, culture just missed the moment. And so it ends up being a huge box office bomb and then ends up like as a negative in his career as opposed to, hey, this is actually him doing what he does. So I agree. But in terms of television horror, I would say Salem's Lot has to be on the Mount Rushmore of greatest television horror films. I think probably the first Night Stalker, which was the television movie for Kolchak before the series came out, probably is also on that Mount Rushmore. But I think at least we got the creepy face here in Salem's Lot has to be considered the thing that launched 1,000 nightmares for those of us growing up in the 80s and 90s.
Being able to have the constraints of network television in 1979 and still have at least two of the most terrifying scenes I've ever seen, which is the first time we see Barlow, which is horrifying. And obviously the kid floating in the window, which is like everybody. That's perfect. But also the Jeffrey Lewis, when we first see him and his eyes are glowing, when we first realize he's been turned. And there's a weirdly terrifying scene that has nothing to do with the vampires when Fred Willard's being menaced with the shotgun when the guy catches him with his wife. Like, that's really scary. And it was the first King adaptation, I think, that really felt like a Stephen King story. It kind of got
so
what
many
makes
before
it
that, especially those kind of lower budget. I mean, again, I love My Christine. I love Cujo. Maybe the only person on the planet who loves Cujo, but I love Cujo. But this, especially because I think it had the space. Because one of the great things I think about Stephen King novels, if you can really adapt the novel, you have to have the space to build these relationships, these towns, these quirky, small, communities. And this has that space to do it. And I think Hooper does a great job, as well as kind of focusing on this isolated man and this child and like creating that sense of fear. But you feel like there is this creepy town around it, right? It's not, again, I think some of the efforts to adapt King have not been able to kind of really capture that quirky Americana nature of King's best novels.
Yeah, the sort of American lore, like the sort of mythology of the suburb, of like is sort of so quintessential. And again, this was a smart director who took a King novel and changed it because he truly realized you have to adapt something. You have to adapt it for the medium. And he made a change that improved on the story, in my view, which was splitting Barlow into two people. Because in the book, he's more like Dracula. Like he's, speaks, and having, the James Mason character and then this absolute fucking monster it just makes it so scary. And I put that up there with, Cronenberg's improvements on the Dead Zone by like scrapping the parallel structure and, not making it a brain tumor.
If you look at the best King adaptations, I think Salem's Lot. I think you're right. The Dead Zone. Clearly, I think you have to at least put Kubrick's The Shining, although I don't know that Kubrick's The Shining has any real strong connection to Stephen King's The Shining. But exactly to your point, he took the bits he wanted, as Kubrick always did, got rid of everything else and rewrote the film. And even Misery, it takes that and just says, okay, you can't take this full, expansive, which I think some of the other Stephen King adaptations have tried, and that's where they fail. Like they try to take too much, including Stephen King's produced version of The Shining that was a TV movie, I think on ABC.
Steven Weber.
It was maybe that should have stayed on the page. Maybe the page and the screen don't have to be the same.
No, absolutely not. Like sometimes, again, you truly have to translate it. Like I thought that Castle Rock, which was not based specifically on any King written thing, was like the most true to Stephen King thing we've had in years. Or something like Dr. Sleep, which is still one of the most impressive things I've ever seen someone do. They managed to make a sequel to the movie and the book, which is the Shining. This Kubrick Shining is so different from the book that in order to make a sequel that somehow is a sequel to both things and works like that is a feat that I cannot believe everyone doesn't talk about every day that was pulled off.
It deserves tremendous amount of credit. Yes. Yeah. Because again, King hated the Kubrick adaptation because, as you say, it just took two or three things and pitched the rest and rebuilt this. And how you make a sequel that honors both King's deeply supernatural understory and Kubrick's abandoning of all that. It's pretty impressive.
And have it work.
I should say, if my evening goes on, because after watching the first part of Salem's Lot, Ken, I'm not sleeping. I'll be honest.
Of course not.
Even now, I'm going to be too scared. Yeah. If I'm going to keep myself awake that night, afraid of what's floating outside my window, I'm going to go flipping on down to the Alfred Hitchcock Presents marathon because I gotta have my time with Alfred Hitchcock Presents because that was such an iconic series. And in some ways, just to throw out there, the original Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which ran from, I think it was 55 to 65, probably had a lot to do with the success of Psycho, largely because audiences that came to see Psycho were expecting something much lighter, like the TV series or like North by Northwest, which had been the previous film. So I always have to, I mean, I don't know that Alfred Hitchcock Presents always worked, but I have to give it credit for creating this brand that we know to this day still as Alfred Hitchcock. So that will help me because those were typically a little quirky, a little funny. I think they'll help take the edge off and I'll be able to finally go to sleep on my very late Monday night.
Plus it's Nick at Night, who was just the kings of promo and fun twists on and repackaging old stuff in a way that made it new and fun. And for Halloween week, they showed marathons of Alfred Hitchcock Presents every night, and they had a contest to count up the bodies. And you would all the bodies that week, and you would win a cruise. You would win like a murder mystery cruise. And so it's all week. It's the Nick at Night Alfred Hitchcock Dead Giveaway, they called it. Nice. And it just, what a fun, like on brand, like clever way to promote, you know, a bunch of reruns.
No, absolutely. And it's funny, I do think that sometimes, because we were talking earlier about, you know, that the more channels or media platforms there are, the more there's this desire for content. And obviously now we're in an unprecedented age of a billion streaming options on any given day. But the unfortunate part of that sometimes is that we miss that curation, right? Yeah. Nick at Night could curate, or, you know, the Sci-Fi Channel could curate, or that brief moment that NBC had Chiller TV, they could curate. Now, I'm a big fan of Shudder, the streaming service, and they try to do the curation, and there are others that try to do the curation, but it just isn't the same when I'm choosing when and where and how much, and I come back and watch the rest of it tomorrow, versus the good old days where you had to sit down in front of the TV and go through the ads and go through the, you know, cruise contest to get to the next episode. There's something wonderful about that curation. It's almost like I still miss radio. Like obviously I like having Spotify and choosing what I want to listen to, but I kind of love the days when the DJ would just come on and, you know, I was in their hands. Right?
It's harder to discover things because you can watch, listen to, or read anything you want as long as you already know what you like. And it's the people who are able to recontextualize things so they could take something old and make it new to you and make you look at it in a different way, even if it's something you've seen before, which is definitely something that Nick at Night did. The shared experience piece of us all watching it together, and I would not pick this movie, but I know USA Saturday Nightmares always shows a movie I like, so I'm going to watch it. And, you know, I never would have watched this bizarre movie Grotesque with Linda Blair in it, and Tab Hunter, but man, what an entertaining piece of garbage this is, you know?
So I'll tell one quick story that you probably will edit out because it's boring and no one will care.
I'm sure no.
So I'm not quite old enough to have watched the original Kolchak series on it. I was only like 5. So I may have watched it. I don't remember. But when I discovered Kolchak was in the late 70s when CBS had that amazing late night just package of stuff. Like, you know, it was Barnaby Jones, it was Quincy, it was whatever. Now, the reason I watched that was because as a kid who was a huge Marvel fan, I was scanning through TV Guide and saw The New Avengers. And I thought, oh my God, no one told me they'd made a television series of the Avengers. I'm going to sneak out after my bedtime, go watch The New Avengers. And then I see these British people, and I thought, what the hell is this? Eventually I got hooked. And so then on a regular basis, I was slipping out of my room to go to the TV room in the house and quietly turning on the lowest volume and listening to the adventures of The New Avengers and eventually later The Avengers. And then one day, on comes this guy named Kolchak, and that was the beginning of my love affair with Kolchak. But to your point, it was discovering something that was not driven by an algorithm. It was not something I chose. It was there, and I sat and I watched it, and it really did reshape my view of horror and culture, and probably led to my career. God help me, it led to what I do today. So
yeah, and it's all because it was cheap to air for some executive, which is like kind of amazing. And the Avengers, obviously, the same crew made both Dr. Fives movies and the Final Program, and like I love the Dr. Fives movies. The Final Program's such a bizarre movie. I think is it the only Michael Moorcock adaptation? Have we gotten another one?
Not to my knowledge. I think you're right.
Weird. Like that movie, I am like, I don't know who greenlit this, and I don't even know what's going on, but I just love it. And like, I think the Five stuff is my favorite Vincent Price. Like, it's just everything I want in a Vincent Price movie.
No, that's what you love, those days when they just go for it. I mean, I love films even today when someone just goes wackadoodle. And they say, fine, we're going to go even wackadoodler. Like, we're just going to follow this bizarre line. I love horror movies when you sit and think, you can't do that. Like, that's insane. Yeah. You can't have that. That's why I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre, particularly during the dinner scene. And when she passes out and you think, okay, God, this has got to be over. And she wakes up and you're right back there and it just keeps going. Yeah. And you think, this can't be happening. Like, I can't be watching this on this film. So
and they're mocking
I think all those things, and I think that is where, I guess, to your younger viewers, I would encourage you to go outside the algorithm, try streaming services you haven't used, grab a title you've never heard of, check out, Turkish horror, check out Chinese, check out Taiwanese, check out whatever. Like, get out of your comfort zone and push yourself, because that's where things get really fun.
And watch the whole thing. Don't check out after 5 minutes because you didn't pay for it. Because that's the thing. There's so many movies that I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is amazing. That at the beginning I was like, I'm really into this now. Tuesday, what are you doing?
Well, of course, I've got to finish what I started. So I've got, again, I said I cheated, but I would probably did watch Salem's Lot, the conclusion. Got to bring that through to its final. And then I think probably after that, in honor of you, I'm going to flip on down as soon as that's over and catch the last part of Tales from the Crypt, the movie.
This is the Amicus Tales from the Crypt, these very 70s, the Volta Horror and Tales from the Crypt. I believe Tales from the Crypt is the one with the Home for the Blind and Patrick McGee, which that to this day, that one terrifies me with just like the razor blade. But yeah, amazing, fun anthologies. And I think a lot of people, because they like the HBO Tales from the Crypt, went back and watched it and were like very disappointed because they're very different tonally.
Yes.
Even though they did some of the same episodes, like the All Through the House is very different. And I think I prefer the one in the Amicus movie. But yeah, Tales from the Crypt, always fun. Amicus, watch all day. It's not an Amicus movie, but I love it so much. I watch it every year. I'm looking at my big box VHS of it there too. Is the Monster Club. Love the Monster Club, the R. Chetwood Hayes stories. Some of those I wish someone would remake because they could have been just so much better. But
no, although be careful what you wish for, Ken, because sometimes they take those precious things from our childhood and they remake them, and you think, oh, you just should have left it. Like I'll be bold enough to say, like the Salem's Lot remake.
Yeah.
I was kind of excited. I heard people say good things. I thought, okay, I'm going to revisit a childhood trauma, and it was traumatizing, just in a different way.
Yeah. It was like, no, you're kind of missing the point here with this. Well, it's a quote that I misquote and paraphrase, and I'm 99% certain it's David Cronenberg who said this. But when they asked him when he remade The Fly if he thought it was just an amazing movie and his favorite movie, and that's why he remade it, he said, no, it's a terrible movie. And he said, it's a terrible movie and a brilliant idea. And he goes, that's what you remake. A movie that has such potential and has a brilliant idea, and they just couldn't execute it the right way for whatever reason. That's what you remake. And I'm like, yes, which is why the Blob remake is so good, and the Thing remake is so good, and the Fly remake is so good, because they're really great ideas that they just didn't quite have the, for a variety of reasons, the resources to execute, right?
No, and I feel like the Salem's Lot remake that was just a year or so ago had all the budget and removed all the good ideas.
Yeah, and it was like that. That was a great idea that was well executed the first time. Like, what are you going to add to it? you know. Although I will say I do like the Night of the Living Dead remake, and I enjoy the updates and changes they did with it. That makes it worth watching, and it's one of the only remakes I can think of that plays on the fact that you think you know what's going to happen, and it purposefully turns on you in ways that make it really enjoyable to watch.
No, I'm not a big fan of remakes or requels, sequels, all those sorts of things. I do find, like we've talked about, a lot of them just drain the interest out of it and become cartoonish and are just IP cash grabs. Like, well, we've got Freddy, so let's just keep going until people quit paying money.
Right.
I appreciate that from an industry standpoint. From a cultural standpoint, it's not that interesting. But that's not to say that there's not some great examples out there of really great. I mean, Alien, amazing. Aliens, also amazing, right?
Yeah.
So there's plenty of examples of films that do a better job. That said, Exorcist, amazing. Exorcist 2.
Yeah. The Exorcist TV series from a couple of years ago with Gina Davis was really good.
Yeah, nope, super fun, super fun.
I was surprised by that. Also, my other thing about how sci-fi always has to be grafted onto another genre. You can't have a pure sci-fi film that has to be grafted onto another genre. And Alien's always the illustration, because you have haunted house movie, war movie, prison movie.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I often think about that Alien, that initial trilogy, 3 films, 3 very different films, 3 very prominent, very distinctive filmmakers. And you don't get that very often, right? You typically get trilogies or multiple installments, or either the same director over and over again, or one really great one and then some sort of like half mediocre, or, you know, these kind of journeyman directors who come in and then will end up back in TV for most of their career. Nothing wrong with that, but like they're not. But you look at those first, you know, Cameron and, you know, Ridley Scott and David Fincher. It's like, those are pretty iconic folks, right? And for them to run the first 3.
They're doing their style too. Like, it's not even like, oh, the first movie they were trying to ape, like what. It's like, no, that's a David Fincher movie. That is the most James Cameron of James Cameron-y movies. Like 100% that's their vision. And yeah, I cannot think of another example where it's not the same person.
I think the only example I could think of, although not the same level of consistent success, but was the Silence of the Lambs. So the very first Red Dragon was Michael Mann.
I love that movie.
Was Manhunter. And then you had, of course, Jonathan Demme's iconic Silence of the Lambs. And then that first Hannibal was Ridley Scott.
Yeah, and it's very Ridley Scott.
Yeah, very Ridley Scott. And yeah, the Manhunter, for those who haven't seen the Manhunter, which is also Tom Noonan, so there you go. Mm-hmm. All roads circle back in this show. Is I don't know that it's the greatest film ever made, but it is a very Michael Mann film. Like,
it's one of my favorite movies. Yeah. I love it. And side note, I forget if I've told this on the show before. I've talked to Tom Noonan about doing the show before, and super nice guy, but there's like, I think it's a certain age of guys that, like, if I'm emailing with them, they'll just call me. Like, they're like, they're like a call me guy. And Tom Noonan is that. And he called me and he sent, it was Dollarhide. Like, he's on the phone. That's how he talks, you know? It was like, hey, Ken, this is Tom Noonan. Like, you know, like, and it was just like, he could have been nicer, but my God, I was so scared. Like, it was
you double locked the door that night, didn't you?
Yeah, like, he's like, here I am. Like, you just, like, I was like, oh my God, Francis is on the phone. Yeah. But again, we're kind of missing actors like Tom Noonan now that like would be the lead in a movie. Like, yeah. And again, cannot recommend The Moving Finger enough. My God, if you haven't seen it, it's great. Makes me wish he directed more. Wednesday, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, we're rapidly approaching
it's Halloween
time, so it is that night. I'm going to be probably throwing candy at small children, telling them to get off my lawn, which is what I usually do. And of course, since it's Halloween, you know what's on my TV. It's Halloween. Yeah, without a doubt, you know, the film that launched 1 billion rip-offs and sequels. You know, John Carpenter's Halloween really set that stalk and slash cycle. It's tremendously important. And as we were talking about earlier, this TV version, which was filled with little chunks that they filmed while doing Halloween 2, is where we first get this idea that Michael is the brother of Laurie. So this familial connection gets kind of laid out there. And then, as you said, gets kind of beaten to death with an increasingly convoluted cult plot, et cetera, et cetera. But setting all that aside, you cannot find, I'll just say this, for me, this is the scary movie I remember first. I was only 8, probably 9. I couldn't go see it. My brother snuck me in because that's the kind of brother I have.
That's what family's for.
Because they're there for. They're there to traumatize you as a child. Right. And what I remember most is, I was a young kid growing up in sort of suburban / rural Texas. And it's the sequence of Laurie running from neighbor's door to neighborhood door, banging on, the lights come on, they look out, and then they close the curtains and turn off the lights and they're done. That only lasts for like 38 seconds. In my 9-year-old mind, that was like an hour. And I could just imagine the same scenario of my neighbors saying, get off the lawn, turn off the lights. And I'm, no, you got to help me. So that struck the heart of American suburban kids everywhere, I think.
Mm-hmm. We won't help you. We don't believe you. That sort of teenage paranoia or childhood paranoia, which again is why like Invaders from Mars is so great and Phantasm is so great, that like everything is terrifying in life or death when you're a kid or a teenager, and having adults dismiss you and not help you is like the scariest thing at that age. And to be able to capture that in a movie and not have it seem silly is really difficult. And Halloween is perfect. Like even, like obviously it is influenced by Bob Clark's Black Christmas, but so very different. And like the terrifying thing in Black Christmas to me are those phone calls. Like the phone calls in that, like just isolated alone, are absolutely bone chilling. And the Halloween-y type stuff is like not even like top 5 in that movie.
No, I think what Carpenter did was take that Black Christmas and translate it to slightly younger, so we've got high school age kids and American suburban culture. And again, folks probably know this, but Halloween was again small budget independent film. It debuted in one theater in Kansas City back in the day when you had that kind of very slow rollout, and did okay the first weekend, but the next weekend was packed because it was the high school kids going out to their friends and saying, "Oh my God, you got to see this movie!" And then slowly but surely across the year, it marches out and becomes this enormously successful film that again spawns everybody, right? I mean, everything, including, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is now back. So I guess we know what you did last summer, a decade ago, and this summer. So yeah, that's all thanks to one creepy kid and his sister babysitter.
When you've been out in LA, have you gone to the houses?
Yeah. No, what I love about Halloween is it's supposed to be set in Haddonfield, which is never said where, but it's clearly supposed to be the Midwest. For your astute listeners, please, next time you're watching Halloween, look at the foliage.
Yep.
There's not a brown leaf anywhere except blowing through the scenes, which, of course, since it was low budget, they couldn't afford to lose. So there was a leaf wrangler on set whose job it was, after they blew the leaves through by the actors' feet, that their job was to collect them all back and put them back in a bag to make sure they had them for the next one. So, but all those flaws of indie film and low budget aside, as you said, brilliant concept, the shape, the force of evil, this idea of fate, this young girl, really the quintessential final girl, which would become such a thing and everybody would talk about it and everybody make movies about it. Laurie is really that first fully formed final girl. It just captures so much of that cultural moment in the 1970s. But I think, as you were saying, it also captures just what it's like to be a teenager.
Yeah.
Right? To be caught between a kid and adult and not wanting to believe in things, but still kind of believing in things and feeling like you should be fearless, but kind of being terrified, and into all that chaos and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Walks Michael, and he's daddy, he's back, and this nonsense is over. And,
and Loomis as a character is, he's Van Helsing, and Van Helsing was completely out of his mind. Like just gone completely over the edge, which is a really interesting. I mean, they go too far with it in the sequels, but it's perfect in that first one where he's just, as it goes along, you're like, oh, he's crazy. Like you're like, this kid has broken his brain by doing nothing. Like this guy's just gone nuts, and he's just completely crazed by the end of that movie. And it's like there's two psychos running around. And it's like that
Ahab.
was something.
Like he's Ahab chasing the whale. And I would say for the folks who really want to pay attention, if you go to the TV version of Halloween, which again has some added footage to cut out some of the violence, et cetera, there is an extended scene with Loomis in the sanatorium, like talking to Michael, saying, you fooled them, but I see you, you're a pure evil and all that sort of stuff. So you almost get more of that backstory build of Loomis as this, like you say, utterly obsessed. And so by the end of it, he is broken, right? His brain is gone.
Yeah, you're like, is he projecting this stuff on this kid? Like what, which is another thing where you're like chicken and the egg, a lot of the stuff, if you remove it from the sequels and the lore later and just look at it in isolation, this thing of like, you're like, did this kid have a mental illness? And then Loomis made this kid into a monster. Like what is going on with this thing? And they don't bother to explain it, which is why it's great.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, again, that's one of the things, the sequels. And again, look, every horror franchise has the same sort of thing. Halloween, in their desperate attempt to make it interesting, creates the Thorn cult and all this nonsense that doesn't need to be there. Even my beloved Jason in Friday the 13th creates this evil entity that jumps between bodies, et cetera, all wrong, horrible nonsense. Just stick to the simple story. Babysitter, butcher knife, hockey mask, machete. We're good.
Right. We don't need explanation. That's what science fiction's for.
Exactly.
Like, stuff scary when we don't understand what's going on. The Halloween Night, you got to watch that. There's a lot of great stuff on, a lot of movies. What's the best costume you had as a kid?
I still quite remember fondly and I don't remember the make of them. You'll probably remember this, where you had a plastic sheet over you that usually was like explaining.
Yep. Ben Cooper or
Incredible Hulk, blah, blah, blah. And you had that one formed mask. For me, it was probably the Incredible Hulk because I was a big Incredible Hulk fan.
Cut your face.
So those are the ones I remember most as a kid. Like just especially, again, I was a big superhero kid. So I was probably either Spider-Man or, for me, it was probably always the Incredible Hulk because I was a huge Hulk fan. Now, how about you? What was your favorite?
I had a Ben Cooper in '83. I was Oscar the Grouch with the the plastic bag and thing. That was quite a good one. I went as the Phantom of the Opera a number of years, but from various like different movie versions. When I was like 7, 8, 9, they were like, "Okay, kid." So probably one of those. The Incredible Hulk is a great one. Again, if people at home are playing TV Guidance Counselor Bingo, you're going to get a square. Are you familiar with the Ken Johnson's Hulk Out list?
No. What is this?
So Ken Johnson, who did V, but also did the Incredible Hulk television series, on his website, some guy went through every single episode of the Incredible Hulk TV show and in the most matter-of-fact, non-editorializing way, wrote down what triggered the transformation and in a row. And it's just a simple list. And it is the funniest thing I've ever read because it'll literally be like hit by a boulder, doesn't have change for the phone, killed, like hit by a bear, a bulldozer. Like it's just like these ridiculous, it's so brilliant. It's like it's just so fun to read.
I love that.
It's called the Hulk Out
probably,
list.
Those were the reasons I probably would have hulked out 40 times today.
Yeah. Doesn't have change for the phone. That's my favorite one. And then I was like, oh yeah, I had to look that up. Cause it is, he's on the phone and the operator's like, please, put 25 cents. And he's like, I don't have 25 cents. Oh, it's perfect.
Just think how Bruce Banner would deal with like pop-up ads on your websites. God, I don't want to buy that.
I don't want to update Windows. I have a meeting. And again, I could about that all these too, because as a comic book kid, I don't think people understand how both thrilling and disappointing the Incredible Hulk TV series was, because in the comics at that time, we had like the Defenders and like cosmic stuff going on. And we finally get the Incredible Hulk on TV and he's fighting like developers and evil construction people. Like, it's just like,
and mainly like throwing filing cabinets around.
Yeah.
It's like, Where's my Hulk? But I will say, as a kid who grew up in that era, the Spider-Man, even the kind of horrible Captain America series, the Hulk, it was something. And that's why sometimes I have these kids now say, oh, these Marvel movies suck now. I'm not going to say they're as good or whatever. But I'm going to tell them, you have no idea what it was like. Back in my day, you
show
kids.
them Doctor Strange. Show them the TV movie Doctor Strange with the John Holmes looking lead, and you tell them to come back and complain to you after that. Because, woof, it's bad.
You'll appreciate your multiverse of madness, and you'll like it.
Right. When you go, look, speaking of full moon, Dr. Mordred was the best Doctor Strange we thought we were ever going to get, and that was all we had.
We were happy.
Yes.
And
poor Jack Kirby was stuck doing Thundar the Barbarian, and we loved it.
Absolutely.
I have gone back and rewatched that. I do really like that. Yeah, there's some really cool, weird stuff in that show. Although, as we all know, the Earth was destroyed in 1994, according to Thundar.
Honestly, Ken, there are days I wish that had happened. I'm just going to put it out there. I think at this point, I would vote for meteor. I'd vote for massive meteor strike and mutant, lizard things.
Mux.
I think I'm good. I'm ready.
It's funny when I rewatch Thundar, I put it on sometimes when I go to bed, and the beginning of that show is terrifying because I was like 4 years old when it was on, and it's like, in 1994, everyone dies. Like, that's literally how it starts. And you're a kid, and you're like, oh my God. And there's some truly terrifying like monsters on that show, thanks to Kirby. Thursday, what are we doing?
So, I'm a completist, as I've made clear here so far. So I'm going to have to follow up Halloween with Halloween 2. So this is the 1981, where they were filming some of the stuff that would end up in the 78 TV version. Rick Rosenthal, still John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who deserves all the credit. She's an amazing producer, was a huge part of all those films. Where we have it in here, it's all set in a hospital. So very claustrophobic, very fun. Not quite as, I would say, I don't think anybody's going to hold Halloween 2 up next to Halloween the first, but I'm going to hold it up as definitely a great way to have that post-Halloween letdown.
Dana Carvey's first on-screen role. He's in the opening there. Also, the first sequel, I think, that literally picks up the second after the last one ends, which, so many slasher movies picked up later, which is somewhere online. I wish I can't remember to credit them for this, but they did a timeline of the Friday the 13th movies. And the first 5 movies takes place over 3 days. In the timeline. Wow. It's like some bizarre thing where it's literally by the 4th movie, which came out in 85, it's actually still 1982 or something if you follow the timeline. And it's like that with Halloween. It's what, 2 years later, and it's so it's technically a period piece. It took place 4 years ago.
I kind of see at the end of those movies, Jason going punching out, going, God, I'm exhausted.
Yes, yeah.
Long day.
Oh, what a weekend, man. There's a made-for-TV movie on here that they only give 2 stars. I've never heard of this, but it just caught my eye because of the title. It's from 1969, stars Chuck Connors, which again, that's always going to catch my eye. Speaking of terrifying people, Tourist Trap remains one of the scariest movies I've ever seen in my life. It's called The Profane Comedy. And it's this made-for-TV yarn about an ex-con who gets a surprising welcome home from those who sent him to prison, starring Chuck Connors. Nothing about this description makes any sense to me.
I so want to see that.
Yeah, I have to hunt this down.
Would be competing for my attention, and equally insane would have been Cop Rock, which I think was,
not that bad. I will say not that bad. And Father Dowling Mysteries that evening has 2 horror-adjacent guest stars, John Vernon and Amy Steele, speaking of Friday the 13th.
Nice. So, yeah, I might have been torn. Karate Kid Part 2, of course, also on, which is horrible. I mean, horror adjacent. And we still got our Alfred Hitchcock going on. But I think for me, I'm going to settle in with my syringe and my scalpel and enjoy a little hospital madness. I will say this. I find this funny. At my age, I've now been in the hospital a couple of times because as you get older, that happens. And what always kills me about hospitals in horror movies is that they're quiet and empty.
Yeah,
this has never been my experience.
No, the one time that was the case was in 2021. I had a kidney stone. I went to the ER. It was like the height of COVID, and I was literally the only person in there.
So they should all be set during COVID, because otherwise you just drift off, and then in comes the next one going, I'm going to poke you, I'm going to grab you, I'm going to write this on the chart. Now get some rest.
You cannot get some rest. Yeah. It's that is the horror. Also want to mention Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World is on, which I always love. So weird. That is like the classic 70s, that revival of sort of weird occultish Fortean times stuff. That's like quintessential Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World in search of
brilliant stuff.
This episode is attempts to discern the origins of ancient drawings found in England, Chile, and Peru.
Absolutely, because there's a conspiracy. Although in fairness, I kind of blame those series like that and In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy
Charts of the
for
Gods,
creating the condition where Americans believe any wackadoodle theory that someone puts out there. So
like even at the time, I feel like most people were, especially the alien abduction stuff, like everybody was like, "Oh, yeah, that guy's a drunk." Like it was like every single person.
I know how you lost time. It was called 12 pack.
Yeah. Oh, he came home and told his wife he was kidnapped by an alien, and that's what happened to his pants. Like like every time, but it was still entertaining. And then there was like a weird cultural shift where all of a sudden people were like, "I believe him." And you're like, wait, what? Like
I blame this. We saw it in Leonard Nimoy. We saw it in Arthur C. Clarke. We said, that could be true.
That seems plausible. Also, speaking of the Avengers, I forgot that a mystery was hosted by Diana Rigg at this time.
That's right. No, I remember. I loved that. Of course, everybody loves Diana Rigg because appeal. Hello.
She took over for Vincent Price.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've got, look at this. The through line of this episode is shocking. It's amazing.
And they, of course, starred together in Theater of Blood.
Yep.
But she's so funny. So funny and such a good, weird movie. Final night of the week. We're into November. It's November 2nd. That post-Halloween come down. What are you doing?
Well, of course, I'm going to start with Quantum Leap. A series I think was brilliant and really criminally underappreciated in many ways. I think Quantum Leap was so great, consistently so strong. And then I think I'm going to settle in down the dial because I tend to spend my time down the dial. I would say I would consider the Rockford Files reruns because I did have soft spot in my heart for Rockford. But I think I'm going to slide on down to the made-for-TV 1985 remake of The Bad Seed with Lynn Redgrave and David Carradine, just because I like me some TV schlock in the week.
There were some, speaking of horror remakes that were good, there was quite a few terrible made-for-TV ones. I recall the Whatever Happened to Baby Jane with John Glover in it, if you recall that one. The Bad Seed. There was two things that there were remakes, and then they would do made-for-TV sequels, like The Birds 2, Land's End, or the Psycho 4 that we saw there. The Omen 4, that was a made-for-TV movie in '88 that was really terrible. The made-for-TV sequel, I can't think of a single one that's good.
No, none of them are. They're all horrible, and that's why I'm going to end my Friday with some good old schlocky remake of The Bad Seed. Because, kids are all terrible. I'm going to hold on to that. That's the lesson I took from most of these things. Chucky, The Exorcist, The Omen, The Bad Seed. Children are horrible. They should be kept locked up somewhere.
Teenage girls especially if you listen to Judge Judy, every third episode of Judge Judy, she goes on a rant about how teenage girls are the most evil things on the planet Earth, and it's always pretty entertaining.
That was my high school experience. Yes.
I think the best of us, that was the case. I do want to mention there's sort of a forgotten version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow on that night that I really love, and it stars Jeff Goldblum and Meg Foster. And it was from 1980. It gets, for whatever reason, like it just never re-airs, and it's very good. It's, got a good cast. Jeff Goldblum's obviously Ichabod Crane, and he's got that weird Goldblum energy. Meg Foster, always weird and stuff, like speaking of Carpenter. But that's on TBS, which is well worth watching if people had never seen that, worth watching. And then you got Ray Bradbury Theater. Sally Kellerman is in this one. The Hitchhiker, which was again like erotic thrillers without nudity somehow. And then the Swamp Thing, the synopsis of the Swamp Thing episode, lies lead to trouble. Why bother to put a synopsis there? Like what? How is that helpful?
Things cause problems.
How is that helpful to anyone in any way? That we're going, oh, things happen. Okay, all right. I do want to mention, because Facts of Life comes up a lot on the show, the episode of The Hitchhiker that night does star Nancy McKeon, Facts of Life's Jo. A lonely woman played by Nancy McKeon fears her husband is unfaithful and threatens to frame him as a killer at large as a last attempt to keep him loyal. I feel like 80% of that sentence is every episode of The Hitchhiker.
Yes. But the tagline is murder kills a marriage, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, that's going to be true.
That would
you
do
murder
it.
Your
that
spouse,
would do it.
The marriage is definitely over.
And again, there's no reason for me to know Paige Fletcher was the Hitchhiker, but for some reason that's in my brain forever. And it always will be. And I don't even know why.
So can I make one more observation about this amazing issue?
Yes, please do.
What I love is the very back cover.
Yes.
Because not only were cigarettes only like $4.99, which, back in those days. But here's the thing, kids. You're thinking, well, of course cigarettes shouldn't be cheap because they're horrible for you. But hey, back in 1990, do you know what smoking had? Cigarette smoke contains carbon monoxide. That's not so bad. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
And these are lights.
Heritage American Classics, $4 off your carton. I think I want to go back to 1990 when smoking was perfectly fine.
And I love that it's called Heritage, which is a brand I've never heard of before. But like Heritage, classic American taste.
It's red, white, and blue. So this is this is back when smoking made you American.
Patriotic.
It did not cause cancer. It just contains some carbon monoxide, but that's fine.
I mean, without carbon monoxide, what are plants going to do?
I feel like I'm an environmentalist. I just gotta puff out, and I'm saving the plant. Thank you, Smokey the Bear. I am doing my part.
You're feeding those plants. It's your heritage. Well, this was great. And again, I'm looking forward to the new book as well. Is there any like comfort show you go back and watch when you're just like trying to relax?
I do, yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of Kolchak, so I have found myself watching that over and over again. Lately, I've been on Tubi watching like a lot of. I've been going back and watching the Sid and Marty Krofft stuff. So like the Bugaloos and like Land of the Lost. So maybe as I'm getting to be a certain age, I'm finding myself going back and watching some of those really weird psychedelic kids movies. And recently I watched, speaking of Halloween, so we've been doing this, I went back and rewatched Paul Lynde's Halloween special.
Kiss.
Which featured Kiss. So I was super, super excited to do that.
Yeah. And I will say Land of the Lost has some really weird, hard sci-fi concepts about like pocket universes and like time loop, like some really advanced stuff that should not be in a kid's show.
No, I really think back in that era of quote unquote children's television, I don't think anyone was paying attention. So I think some of those writers were just absolutely just going in really bizarre directions. And I think it's similar to, we were talking earlier about Dark Shadows, where, when you get into the later episodes of that, you've got Lovecraftian old gods and doppelgangers and alternate timelines and all that sort of stuff. And you're like, when did the adults stop watching what they were doing on this show? Because it clearly just went completely crazy. So, yeah, I find myself, I think, just revisiting my childhood. And like you said, sometimes watching things and thinking, ooh, how did I ever watch that? But often watching things and thinking, wow, that's like really strangely advanced for a small child.
Oh yeah, like this is much better than I thought. Like I'm noticing subtleties and angles that I didn't notice before. And again, to your point with your students in the Marvel movies, like to have something about like multiverses and like these were not mainstream things. For these to be in a TV show, that was completely insane. Just nuts. Again, also, Alan Moore invented the Marvel multiverse, which doesn't get credit for, in the Captain Britain comic. He named it 616 even.
No, all roads lead back. No,
yep.
That's
Alan Moore.
So speaking of which, can I make one last plug?
Yes, please do.
So I have another new book coming out. I'm not quite sure when this one will be out, but it's coming soon. It is Kendall is my debut novel.
Oh, nice.
And it is, the reason I was thinking of it, not just because I want to shamelessly plug, but obviously that's what I do, but I was thinking of it because it is a mix of horror and superheroes. I would call it Watchmen in the Lovecraft universe. The novel is called No One Can Save Us. It's coming out from Nightmare Press,
Ooh, I like it.
which you can find on all your social media kind of outlets. So hopefully sometime this summer, or at least before the end of the year, No One Can Save Us will be out there. So I would say if your kids like us, I would say at least like me, who grew up with a pile of comic books, with Night Shift on top of it, with Fangoria magazine mixed in. That is what this novel is really. It's for people like that who want to still play around with superhero stuff, but maybe in a slightly more violent, adult-oriented perspective. So I feel like people, if they dug the stuff you and I were talking about, this is the novel for them. So No One Can Save Us should be coming out from Nightmare Press.
Is the target audience for that. So thank you so much. It's been so fun.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
There you go. That's Kendall R. Phillips. Go to kendallrphillips.com. Put a link in the show description. Buy his books. Buy all the books already written. Buy the books that are coming out this year. You will not be disappointed. Very fun stuff. If you like the show, you will like his stuff. Again, thank you for everyone for your birthday wishes last week. Yeah, I'm 45. And it's 2025, and oh boy. Anyway, I'll be here next week, so I hope you will too, for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
The year 1994. From out of space comes a runaway planet, hurtling between the Earth and the Moon, unleashing cosmic destruction. Man's civilization is cast in ruin.